welcome to Conversations with Dr. Greer. This is Dr. Steven Greer, the director of disclosureproject.org and CSETI.org, and I would like to welcome Trudy Guyker today to join me in a conversation about the recent really exciting events that happened at the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI, expedition to Crestone, Colorado. We've been going there for about 19 years, and this year was, I think, one of the most spectacular years for contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, and also the experience that the group had in terms of breakthroughs in meditation and higher states of consciousness as an entire group was really rewarding for everyone, and certainly I think for me as someone who was sort of coordinating the project. So, and to give people a background on this, I just want to explain that CSETI.org, you can go to the website, CSETI.org, is a nonprofit that is the parent organization for disclosureproject.org, and what we really focus on CSETI is contact with interstellar civilizations that are visiting Earth in the spirit of universal peace. And the foundation of our contact protocols, which those who understand what a puja is and what the World Puja Network is all about, is really centered on the understanding of consciousness and universal consciousness or cosmic consciousness, and how that state of higher awareness can facilitate contact with these interstellar civilizations using a set of protocols that we've developed over the last, 38 years in my case, where we use consciousness to be able to see or remote view extraterrestrial worlds or individuals or spacecraft, and then interface using a type of meditative technique that involves what I call coherent thought sequencing, where the mind actually interfaces with an extraterrestrial civilization's electronics. And one of the things that people come to understand as they study this issue is that if you're going from one star system to another, which by definition, if an extraterrestrial vehicle is near Earth, it's had to go faster than the speed of light. When you go beyond the speed of light, and I talk about this in terms of the crossing point of light, you go into really other dimensions. You go into other energy fields, and those other dimensions are closely approximate the visual aspect of thought, what one might call the astral component, and that they have developed, these civilizations, electronic devices that actually interface with this kind of coherent thought that's emanating from a larger or expanded state of consciousness, so that the central science of what we're doing is the science of consciousness and the science of higher states of consciousness, which, of course, the Vedas and doing the puja is really all about. And so now we do use other protocols when we make contact. We have high-powered laser that we send up that goes 200 or 300 miles into space. We have electronic signals that were recorded in crop circles in England, and also that we've recorded at Mount Shasta and other places that have been received from extraterrestrial civilizations that we then play and send out over radio signals. And that gives sort of a linear vector, I call it, where a specific location in time-space, which helps make it very, very clear. But the central protocol has to do with experiencing the multiverse that's folded within us, and that has to do with understanding the nature of consciousness in its not just individual form, but in the non-local form, the universal aspect of spirit and consciousness that allows people to see into the future, to have lucid dreams of the future, to understand how you go beyond the sort of barrier of the distances in space, and using these very advanced concepts in both science and physics, but also consciousness to do so. And this really is the central part of what we do. And these expeditions are as much a meditation retreat as they are anything. And as many of you know, before I became a medical doctor doing emergency medicine, I was a meditation teacher, and study the ancient Vedas, and I'm trained as a meditation instructor. And so at these expeditions now, we do pujas, and then I teach people a meditation technique using a mantra, and we do other types of meditation techniques as well and trainings. And so this is what we do for about a week in these remote locations under the stars. So this particular expedition, we had about 22 people there for the week, and we were out in what's called the San Luis Valley, which is this huge valley. It's actually viewable from space. That's about 50 miles wide and 200 miles long. That's in southern Colorado. And I own some land there near a little resort town called Crestone, which is actually a sort of spiritual center that has many spiritual traditions represented there. The Dalai Lama, for example, had Ambassador Jim George of Canada, who's been a big supporter of our project, build the only authentic Tibetan stupa in the West there in Crestone, which we view from the land I own. And there's also a Zen meditation center, a Vedic center, a Carmelite monastery. There are dozens of different spiritual communities that are based there in this teeny little town of Crestone, Colorado. And it's just north of the Great Sand Dunes. And actually the history of this area is that there have been accounts of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence and sightings of craft and objects that go back to pre-Columbian times, back to Native American era. And in the more recent times, if you talk to some of the old-timers there, they will tell you accounts of seeing objects coming right up out of the mountains there and coming out of the area where the sand dunes are, and also Blanca Peak. So we began going there in 1993, and so we were there again this year with the team, and we had just an incredible number of close encounters and sightings and experiences right on that location. Now, a little bit about where we were located. I've had this land in Crestone for about 17 years, I guess now, 16 or 17 years, and there was a woman who was selling it back in the 1990s for a nonprofit, to benefit a nonprofit. So I said, okay, well, I'll get it. It was fairly inexpensive. And we got this land, and we have never actually done the research on it because it had so many cacti and things on it. But it also have a cedar tree where we put the remains of Sherry Adamak, who had worked with CSETI in its very early days and helped launch it with me. And as many of you may have heard, she had passed away back in 1998. And so from 1998 till now, we've always visited the land to sort of honor her passing over into the worlds of light and go there, but we've never had a place. But this year we decided to get somebody to open a path from the road into the land and make what looks like a big crop circle, a big circle where we could meet, and that's where we had this expedition. And I think that it was the most spectacular and intimate contact expedition we've ever had there. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that we were there and that Sherry was actually facilitating some of this from the other side, working in these transdimensional energy forms, because just as humans have had contact with those who passed on into the worlds of light, extraterrestrial intelligence can have that level of contact. And when Sherry had passed away in 1998, the night of her passing, she actually, in a lucid dream, introduced me to this extraterrestrial ambassador who I call Kindness, and is this incredibly kind, beautiful female ET who has a perfectly round head, no hair, really beautiful sort of almond-shaped eyes and a small nose, very fine-featured limbs and torso. And her craft often is seen as this kind of whitish to blue-white ship that comes in and will arc. And this has happened at almost every expedition since Sherry passed away, where we have seen this spacecraft that has this senior ambassador on it. And we have it filmed. We have photographs of it. there is a real trans-dimensional, if you want to look at it, that connection between our group and Sherry and the senior extraterrestrial ambassadors, one of whom is this ET that I call Kindness. Now, what her real name is, I don't know. I just call her that because she's sort of the essence of kindliness. And so that's what was, I'm just trying to set the stage kind of for where we were for this week in Colorado. And it was a very spiritual but also very beautiful, emotional experience for everyone, and also some of the most extraordinary contact, both in terms of sightings of craft and beings that were in the field, but also electromagnetic contact that happened. So we're going to go through all of that, and I'm very excited to have a really senior member of our expedition team who's been involved with CSETI since the 1990s with us today, Trudy Guyker, who hails from Chandler, Arizona. So welcome, Trudy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, yes, always. Well, Trudy, why don't you share some of your impressions? I know I've sort of set the stage for where we were and why we were there.
Okay. I'm going to try to tell about my experiences that happened, that other people had a part of it, and not just me, because
right. I
like confirmation
sure.
on things that happened to me. And the first really big thing that happened is I think it was on Saturday night, I saw, and I feel it was very, very close, just outside the circle, I saw an oval light. It was an amber cream light and egg-shaped. And it is by far the most solid object I have ever seen in my 17 years. It was as solid as anything. I'm sitting here in my dining room, and any object in this room, it was that solid appearing to me. And luckily, Emery was able to catch that on his camera.
Right.
And so I hope it. If we can analyze it and make sure that's what it was. But anyway, that was spectacular for me. And then another thing.
But was that the first night we were there?
It was Saturday night. The first night was Friday night.
That's right.
So it was Saturday night. And then another thing that happened I thought was very, very personal was we were going on our way to debriefing after the circle broke up, and my husband and I were walking up the walkway, and I had my right arm hanging down, and I felt this intensely warm area. So I stopped, and I felt there, and there was an area maybe 2 feet high and 2 feet wide that was warm. Incredibly warm, and I'd put my hand there, and then I'd move it out, and it was cold. Back in there, and it was warm. And my husband felt it, and he felt the warmth too. And so we continued on into the house, and apparently this being that was there followed us into the house, and later on, a short time later, actually. Steven said he saw a vortex of energy behind Fred. So right. I feel like that was that being that had followed us in. Do you
right.
remember that, Steve?
Oh, I do. And this is one that for people who are new to this information, if you can visualize a very high voltage electromagnetic field that could cause an object or a person to basically dematerialize but be present just in its electromagnetic signature or a heat signature, this is what we're talking about, and it's very advanced physics. But these extraterrestrial civilizations aren't always around fully materialized, and people have very materialistic view because they think of everything has to be like early 21st century physics. But we're dealing with civilizations, some of which are literally millions of years more developed than we are, and yet they have physical bodies, they have physical craft, they have physical planets. They're not just based in the so-called astral world of light, and they will manifest in these very, very, some would say strange ways, but for us it's become very ordinary. And that is, you'll see an object that will appear, and it'll be there for a fraction of a second or a few seconds or maybe a minute, and then it dematerializes, and then what you see is almost like a heat signature or a sort of an area in the field that's scintillating or glowing, and they're shifted beyond linear space-time, but there's an evidence of them. And this is part of what we train people to be able to sense and to see and to do. And also we have electronic devices that will pick up the magnetic field flux, the change in the magnetic background field as these things are going on. And we always, when we break our circle at night, we invite these ETs to come back to our houses and into the lucid dream state with us at night. And that night I had done that, and apparently this ET that had been out in the field with us came back to the house, and literally they could feel it and sense it. And then there was this vortex of energy that I saw, of evidence of this ET. Now, what's interesting is that the cameras that we have now, we just heard Trudy mention Emery. He's a member of our team who has these extremely like 25 megapixel and 12 megapixel Nikon cameras that you can adjust the settings for the lenses and everything. And he's learned over the last 2 years, because it was 2 years ago, actually this year, that he came to Crestone, to take photography where you will see the ship or even the person. And if you go to CSETI.org, you'll see a picture that another member of our team, Raven, took from Joshua Tree about 1.5 years ago of an extraterrestrial being actually floating just outside our circle, who was in an orb. There was an orb of light to the left and a sort of a cone of light that flashed in a fraction of a second. And here is this ET literally floating about 3 feet in the air just outside above the chairs where we had our circle there at Joshua Tree. And yet with the naked eye, all one would have seen would have been a flash, an instant flash of light. It could have been like a little point of like localized lightning in the field. But her camera, she sensed it because we had heard some extraterrestrial voices, actually. You couldn't see anyone, but you could hear this talking over in the desert. So she took the picture and intuitively sent a message to them to pose in the picture or be seen in the picture. And so this one ET did. And so this kind of science is we're talking about really a kind of space age meets Vedas and the puja, because you're dealing with the science of consciousness. But now what's exciting is that evidence of this is being called not only on these detection devices we have that are electromagnetic and magnetic field detectors and laser detector devices, but we're also picking this up with photography and video that heretofore would simply not have been possible even 10 years ago or 5 years ago, because the technology has advanced. And so that's the kind of experiences we have. I'm just wanting to give some explanation for what Trudy is sharing about this being that came back from the field with us that night to the house.
Okay, I would like to tell about a light that I saw. At arm's length, this light appeared to be maybe a little bit bigger than a dime held at arm's length.
And that's large.
It was large, but it was so distinct I was able to see the pattern on this light. And I don't think it was very far out. Maybe hundreds of feet out, I don't know. But it was gray-white, and it was kind of fuzzy. But it was, in the center of this light, there was a mesh pattern. And it was clear enough that I could see that.
Right.
Definite mesh pattern to it. And around the sides of it was like fuzzy fuzzy, streaky lights. It wasn't distinct. It wasn't a circle. It was fuzzy. But it was so big, and it was so there. I could not believe it. And thank God a fellow team member was there, and he saw it. Jeff James saw it also.
Right.
And so I'm just so grateful he saw it, because that was one of the most spectacular craft that I have ever seen in all these years. So,
and it happened in conjunction with a magnetic field download. We were having communication through their magnetometer, if you remember.
Yes.
And this is something I want to explain, because this is not obvious to people, is that frequently we will have a magnetic field flux. And let me explain what that is. When there's an extraterrestrial vehicle or a being that is nearby, if you have something called a magnetometer, and actually if you have an iPhone, it can be turned into a magnetometer through downloaded the CSETI Contact app that's on the App Store for Apple. There's a whole program there that you can get all the protocols for contact, and including one that will have one that will make the iPhone itself a magnetic field detection system that's very sensitive. And that is actually at the iPhone store, and you can download that and learn the meditation techniques and have the tones that we send out in the space, and it'll be on your iPad or iPhone. It's an amazing app, thanks to Todd Goldenbaum, who developed that for us. But my point is that when an object or a being is nearby, and it can be very nearby, like right on you or between you and another person, these magnetometers that measure the change in the magnetic field around us will go off. Now, we're out in the middle of nowhere where there's no machinery, there's nothing, and other people who will have the identical magnetometers that are sitting 10, 20 feet away, theirs are silent. And so they will be very specific in setting off these magnetometers, but they'll do so in a way that is very anomalous. In other words, if you take a magnetometer over by a car engine or a piece of machinery, it just goes and makes this sound. This was almost like a symphony from space. There was nuance in it, there was emotion in it, and it was actually a series of communications in the tone that the magnetometer started making. And it did this for an extended period of time, and it was during that time period, at the end of it, when there was then this craft that was seen pretty much, I think, in the north or northwest that Trudy is describing. And what we have found is that because there have been, it's interesting because since we have been on this interview, I got an email from a man who's a colonel who had set up the SDI programs for the Pentagon back in the late Carter and early Reagan years, the Star Wars programs where we were developing means for allegedly shooting down missiles in space. And he told me very specifically, this Colonel Bowman, that one of the ruses they used was an alien threat scenario to convince Reagan to proceed with spending huge billions of dollars in putting these sort of weapons in space, and that all of them knew it was a complete hoax. I mean, there was no such thing as an alien threat, because any civilization capable of traveling through the distances of space would have such massive superiority in technology that if they were hostile or threatening, it would all be over before you could say, Jack, be quick. But he told me that he was at the early meetings where the so-called, it's like a false 9/11 scenario, sort of a false cosmic hoax of a threat from outer space was presented as a justification for the war profiteers and the militarists to get tens of billions and then hundreds of billions of dollars for these secret weapon programs that are being used to target extraterrestrial vehicles. And unfortunately, those are fully operational. I mean, that would have been in the 70s and 80s, and this is now 2011. What's interesting is that the ETs have found a way around it by making contact with a team like ours safely using these trans-dimensional communication systems and trans-dimensional ways of materializing and dematerializing. But I think actually this goes back to ancient times, Trudy, because if you look at the accounts of people who had encounters hundreds and even thousands of years ago, often they would be these types of events. Now, of course, sometimes they would get confused and think they were, an angel or a fairy or a God knows what all, but they would have associated with it a craft or something that was a physical phenomenon. And that's what we're seeing. And what we train people is that if we're in an area, and Earth is an area, let's just take the whole Earth, that's kind of a relatively militarized region. And, of course, this is an announced event. The intelligence community knows and the military community knows we're there. Often these ETs will do these sort of enigmatic and, to many people, perplexing ways of materializing, dematerializing, or manifesting, where the manifestation will be this energy field that will move around the circle, some would say almost like a ghost, and suddenly it'll lock onto one of these detectors, and there'll be this whole sequence of amazing communication. And yet it's anomalous, because if it was just something coming from a man-made source, all the magnetometers would have been doing this. Or if it's a radar or laser detector, like you get from a police gun or a radar tower, all of them would be going off at the same time on the same frequency, and they just make, if you have a radar detector in your car, you know what it sounds like when you're hit with a police gun. It just goes, eh. This is not like that at all. This is communicative, it's specific, and so it's sort of trans-dimensional electronic communication, and we had this through a magnetometers that was like we have never had, and it's really, really escalating, and it happened in conjunction with this sighting of this craft that materialized just to our north.
Also, that same night, and I cannot remember if I saw the big light before or after what I'm going to say now, but I saw on the ground, all of a sudden, it was there. It was a globe of dark gray light. It was about 1.5 feet in diameter, and it was just there sitting on the ground. And so I saw quite plainly, and there was no doubt it was there. And so I reported it, and then Steven went with his magnetometer over to that ball of light, or that black light, whatever, the gray light. And they,
it was like a globe about 1.5 feet around, I think is
right,
described.
1.5 feet around, and it was there. I mean, there was no doubt about it. It was not my imagination. It was there. And then you can take over to what you did. You went over there with the magnetometer, and it was in front of Leanna.
Yes, Leanna. Yes, and what happened, this is a really amazing thing, because she had seen this globe appear and then disappear. And it was in the context of us having done a meditation and contact to vector and invite the ETs in. And then I went over with this handheld magnetometers on the sensitive scale, 0 to 3, and it began, as soon as I got over in that, it was completely quiet before. It began to do beep, 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 3 in groups of 3, and then pause, and 3, and pause. And then the energy field moved over a group of women, Deborah and Leanne and another woman, over on the sort of southeast side, or east side of the circle, southeast sector of the circle. And there was this consistent, and it was most centered over this one woman who had never had an experience like this, and she started having this ability to remote view where her eyes were closed, and she was having this kind of kundalini experience with this energy rising up through her spinal column and chakras, and then her third eye was so open that with her eyes shut, she was seeing deep space and all the stars of space like you do when your eyes are open, but even more clearly. I said, oh, yes, that's what it is. And so they were doing this amazing energy work with her. And many people on this expedition this past week had that kind of experience. And then I went across the circle, And what was interesting, Emery and I have had contact with an ET since last summer that will go through the magnetometer. And what had happened on the previous nights and then also that night was this series of 5 beeps and then a repeat, a pause and then a repeat, and then 5 beeps. And there were 2 different sets of ETs doing some type of energy work that we felt had to do with consciousness and DNA structure and creating a whole new race of men and women, humanity on this planet on a very subtle energy level that were kind of resonating through us into the planet to other people. And I know this sounds very strange, but what we're doing is kind of course, not your typical thing, but it's very real and very measurable and palpable, and the experiences people were having were astonishing because, and it was, I mapped the whole area. I went around the whole circle with this magnetometer, and there wasn't really any other area where there was any, but it was so strong right over this one particular person who was having this kundalini and third eye opening, and there was an ET being there. And if I went a foot behind her head, there was nothing. There was no signal at all, completely silence, electromagnetic silence. So these are the kinds of things that you really are astonished when you see it there, because it's, this is so real, and yet, to hear it, I know for many people, they must be going, what in the world are they talking about? But it's an extremely palpable experience, and the energetics of it is that the entire group is elevated into a higher state of consciousness and energy while this was happening. One of the nights when an event like this occurred, everyone felt as if they were in this state of enormous clarity and high energy, even though it was very late at night. And it was a type of energy streaming to the group. In fact, one evening, I remember it was noted that it looked like there was a moon out because it seemed so bright, and yet it was dark, and there was this energy source coming from space that was a beam coming right into the group that made everything look light. So there are all these kinds of anomalies going on while contact is happening, and then periodically there'll be a fully materialized craft. One of the things that happened, Trudy, you may remember, there was a medical doctor there who was a Stanford-trained doctor who had recently come to a short workshop I did in California, I believe in Orange County, and he was very self-deprecating and modest and says, well, I really don't have these kinds of experiences, and I've gone on dozens of meditation retreats. Well, by 3 or 4 days into this, he said, well, this has been the most amazing meditation retreat I've ever been on in my life, and I'm 69 years old. And then he started having this opening happen in his consciousness where he had this prolonged, during one of the meditations in the circle, contact with an extraterrestrial, and actually was able to travel to that ET's world and see the planet and see the house and see this ET in detail, and 3 trainees that this ET was training to be ambassadors, just like we're training people to be ambassadors from Earth to their people, spiritual ambassadors and ambassadors in consciousness and heart. It's not like we normally think of diplomatic, but a sort of a real beautiful experience. And this happened, and then he began to be able to get very precise information. So like one night, I always give people an instruction after the afternoon sessions. What I do is, we have discussions, and I train people in meditation techniques and remote viewing techniques, and then there's about a 3-hour break for meditation and dinner. And during one of those, he actually got a time of when something was going to happen, like 10:43 or 4 or something like that, and another person did. And exactly when he got that time, there was this brilliant blue-white object that lit up in the north, a fully materialized craft that was brighter. If you know what Vega is in the sky, or Sirius, it would have been 20 of those. And it materialized and was there and shone a light towards us and then dematerialized. And I said, oh, that's kindness. And that's exactly the color of her ship. And he realized that, oh, my God, I can do this. And I said, yeah, of course, everyone can do this, because it's about being awake in consciousness and being aware of awareness And then we're doing a technique now where the mantra we actually turn into a Merkaba, a sort of a double-ended tetrahedron that's spinning. And we go out into space consciously in this Merkaba and have these astonishing experiences. Well, this completely opened his eye, his third eye, and his higher state of consciousness, and he began to have direct contact with this extraterrestrial being from this particular world who is from our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, although he was not told what star system. And then he was beginning to get specific information as to when craft would appear. And this was a man who will tell you that he didn't think he could ever have these kinds of experiences with that kind of precision and accuracy. And it was quite a few people had those kinds of breakthroughs. And that's what I tell people, that really what these week-long expeditions are journeys in consciousness and exploring the science of consciousness where it meets the science of extraterrestrial technologies and their worlds in consciousness and the bridge we can make between them. Because the world is going to move from this very fractured, crazy state it's in now and rather quickly into a peaceful world civilization that will be made ready to become part of an interstellar community, a community of planets and a community of star systems. And many, many people know this, and this is why so many people understand it. But what we're trying to do is train people to do this in a very specific way, and not just in a happenstance way where there's an incidental sighting or contact, but where they're on a contact team in their local community. And so, a lot of people who come on these expeditions and go back to wherever, New Zealand or Malaysia or wherever they're from, and they begin to form a team of 3 or 4 or 5 people and do this, and they're having amazing contact experiences. And so what happens with that is that it begins to create what Rupert Sheldrake calls a morphogenic field, which manifests this new reality, the future of universal peace. And so it has an effect in consciousness that's way beyond what we can measure, because one person doing this would have a certain effect, but now that there are hundreds and thousands of people who are doing this, some on their own, some in small teams, it's creating this shift. And it's a shift into a time of universal peace and a interplanetary future. And it's all based in the science of consciousness. And I love being able to talk about this on the World Puja Network, because everyone listening understands what that is, or they wouldn't be listening to the World Puja Network. So I think that it's really an exciting development to see people come to these and then have these kinds of breakthroughs like Leanne did after, Trudy, you saw that globe, that kind of black-gray globe that materialized in the circle, and then to have it confirmed with the magnetic field systems, and then the experience she was having was amazing. And then also Bill, this medical doctor who was there, also had a similar experience. And then I think it was the following night or two, we had a whole series of contact events that happened where there were objects being seen in the sky, and then this download through the magnetometer that was between me and Emery, where there was this really complex, and then suddenly there was diagonally across from where Leanne had been the previous night, where a man from New Zealand was located, Doug, and another member of our team who's a PhD physicist who's been coming for many years, Warren, was located. There was a vector that opened that was the 5 beeps and a whole series of very powerful, and they were having an experience slightly different from what Leanne had, but a very similar sort of experience of enormous energy going through their bodies, consciousness, very emotional sort of contact happening, and it wasn't anywhere else in our area. As I went around the magnetometer here again, it was just located in that very specific area, and that went on for at least half an hour.
And that was when that particular event there, I had seen just before I reported seeing, it was like 12 inches by 4 inches wide. It was a blue ribbon it was like a blue ribbon. It was wavy, and it was horizontal, but it was wavy. And so I reported that, and it was right in front of Warren and Doug. And so that's when you went over and you got it started beeping.
Yes, you actually saw this energy area come into the circle.
Yes.
And it was definitely extraterrestrial. And what's interesting is that throughout this week, Emory was getting photographs of these sort of objects and also ribbons, red ribbons, and energy forms. One of the most interesting one was a night where I went out towards Sherry's tree, where we put Sherry's ashes after she passed away. And it's really a sacred spot for us because she really gave her life helping us get this far. And I was seeing these brilliant, it was like a gold, beautiful gold, brilliant gold-colored craft that kept kind of blipping in and out in the field to the south of where I was standing, to my right. And so Emory took a photograph, and in this photograph is this amazing disc-shaped golden craft that's hovering right above the ground, and it's clear as bell in this photograph. And he got a number of amazing images like that. And one of the things we need to do, about a year and a half ago, we came out with this, with the newest book we have. It's called Contact, Countdown to Transformation. And it has with it, if you go to disclosureproject.org, you can order it, and it has a DVD with it. But it has all the images and things that happened up until, say, spring or summer of 2009. And now, in the last year and a half or so, there's been 10 times more. And so we need to come out with another entire volume because there's so many images and photographs and things and actual images of physical ETs that we photographed now since then, that it's more than a doubling of the contact. It's an exponential increase. And it kind of reminds me like last year when we were in England, when we were out in broad daylight in these crop circles, and I would see an energy field or feel that there was a craft, and Emory would take a picture, and there at the tip of my finger, literally, I'm pointing to an object, and it's a craft hovering on the edge of the field watching what we're doing. And we have numerous photographs like that. So we hoped that we can get some of this put together here. We need to do another whole project, Trudy, to put that together. We need another whole gathering. And in fact, the same thing in France. About a year ago, we were in France, I think the 6th or the 10th of July of 2010, and there's a photograph of this kind of royal purple disc hovering maybe, I don't know, what do you think, 5 or 10 feet above the ground, just outside our circle, and it appeared. A whole group of people saw it kind of blip in and blip out, and I was pointing to it right as I had set up the puja table, because I was going to do a Sanskrit puja, Sanskrit being one of the most, if not the most ancient sacred language on earth, and I was going to do a puja, and I had set up the table, and the circle was still forming, and it was still very light out. And here this disc that is this beautiful, almost royal purple color appears, and it's interesting because we were on this 2,000-year-old estate that had been in the family of people connected to the royal families of France, and who then became organizers of the French Revolution, that were hosting us there. And we hope to go back there. We can go back there anytime that we want, they said. But this color that it picked was almost something out of a royal court. I hate to say that; it seems kind of crazy, but it's a disc. It's an extraterrestrial disc, and it's there very transdimensionally, but clear as a bell on this photograph. And I'm actually pointing to it, but it was because it had kind of come in to honor the puja. And the puja that we do is one that honors the tradition of the ascended masters and the ancient masters going back through eternity, who have brought the knowledge of the light of consciousness and higher states of consciousness to not only the Earth but to other planets. And so these very evolved extraterrestrial civilizations, some of whom are in a state of permanent cosmic consciousness. Their entire societies are. And their technologies emanate from that level of higher states of consciousness. Those, when we do this puja, gather, and you can actually see them gathering frequently. And they'll manifest. There'll be objects that'll light up, orbs, and sometimes entire craft. And what's wonderful is that these really sensitive, advanced, and rather expensive cameras that Emery has will actually capture them, as he did there, and also just this past week in Crestone. And just as a reminder, those of you, I know it's a little short notice, we're going to be going to England July 24th to the 31st for a week. And those of you who can join us, there's still a couple spots that are open. And we're going to actually do a tour during the day of all the crop circles in the area. And then at night, we're going to be doing these contact protocols. And it's wonderful. We have an 1,800-acre farm right there in Alton Barnes. It's in the heart of where all the crop circles have appeared over the years, and where there was about 100-foot diameter discs that materialized back in the 90s on that farm. And we've gotten permission again to use this beautiful estate for our contact work at night. And sometimes we also go into crop circles at night when we get permission and we will do a puja in the crop circle. And that's when a lot of these amazing manifestations happen, because the crops are not the ones that are being hoaxed by humans, but the actual authentic crop circles are amazing, the energy that's in the center of them emanating outward. And frequently there will be extraterrestrial objects seen around that area. And so we'll be doing that for that last week of July this month. And so those of you who want to join us may. And we'll also be at Mount Shasta August 21st to the 27th for a week up on Mount Shasta. And we have about a 40-acre place that we're going to be doing this in a remote area with a view of the entire Mount Shasta region. It will be magnificent. And then we're going to be in the desert of California October 23rd to the 29th. This information is all at CSETI.org, CSETI.org, if you want to find out about it. So, but we will be going back to England, and it's going to be exciting because it's a very small group. There's only going to be around 20 of us, and we're going to continue. And I think the energy, what Trudy and I were talking about before we went on the show here, is that this amazing level of contact and manifestation of ET craft and beings, I think is going to continue and even get greater in England this year.
Yes, I have a very strong feeling about that.
Right. It's going to be amazing.
I would like to add a little bit more to the story of Bill. We were talking about Bill.
Yes.
In his fantastic experience. It was funny. His magnetometer had not gone off all week. And then suddenly it started going like crazy, and that's when he was starting to have all those experiences. And I just want to put an end to the story because it as quickly, as suddenly as it had started, it suddenly stopped. And when it stopped, just a few seconds after that, I saw a form pass in front of me. And it kind of go up across the circle and out.
Right.
And it was as if, that entity left. So I got to see him leave. Right.
Yes, and there was an extraterrestrial being, a male ET, that he had contact with. And it's interesting because, as a scientist and a medical doctor, he was going, I can't believe this is happening. It's so out there. So he actually came out to the site early one night with his magnetometer before anyone got there, and he also had a radar detector, and it was completely silent, no magnetic field, nothing. And he was kind of flummoxed because I walked from my vehicle into the circle, and immediately his radar detector went off. And then after he had this level of contact where his inner sight was open and he had a true unity consciousness experience, then his magnetometer that had been very quiet began to go off in this same amazing sequence. And in fact, it only went off with the 5 beeps and pause. It kind of did that whole symphonic it's hard to describe. We do have an audio recording of it that we'll have to play at some point, but it's almost like if you ever heard like the New York Philharmonic play a modern composer's piece. It's very much not like Bach or something, but it had this kind of cosmic symphonic quality to it coming through this ridiculous electronic detector that just doesn't make those sort of tones, and it's completely amazing. And before this, it had all been coming through the one that I was holding, or that was between me and Emery, and now it was coming out of his. And I said, well, now you see, you have opened up a vector, opened up a connection link to this world and to this spacecraft and this ET. And it's interesting because as that ended, then of course, as you mentioned, Trudy, then you saw this this being sort of move around the circle and float out.
Yes, that was awesome.
Yeah. So
everything there, I'm looking at my notes here, and there are just so many things that are, we could talk for hours about this. I'm going to give some examples of things that happened with the trainees and the members of the circle there that I thought were interesting, and it really helped them. Let's see. Eric, one of the men there, saw a triangular cloud, and it formed very, very quickly, and it stayed there.
Right.
And Doug was sitting next to Eric, and I saw his mouth, I saw his jaw drop when Eric was saying this, because Doug had asked to see a triangular cloud.
That's right.
But it's funny, Doug did not see the cloud, but he had asked to see a triangular cloud.
That's right. And then one other night, Doug had asked that he went up to the Tibetan stupa and had asked the ETs to do a specific thing, and that night that event happened. Yes.
And then another time, Doug had asked to see a J shape, remember?
That's what I'm talking about. That was the stupa. He went up to the stupa, and Doug asked the ETs to come into the sky and come in and make a turn like a J, which, of course, a satellite and a meteorite or whatever cannot do. And that night, he had asked for it, and I had seen something in the sky above where the stupa is in the east, above the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and Emery took a picture, and in that picture is exactly this golden J where a craft came in and makes a turn and almost a 180, but it looks like a J in the sky.
Another thing I thought was very exciting and interesting is Warren and Emery were sitting facing the east, and they saw a large portion of the sky in the east that it was like looking through a blurry glass. And, the stars and everything became, they weren't distinct.
Right.
Sort of like blurred. It was a large areas of the sky that these two people saw. I think that's fascinating.
Yes. Well, and I had seen that multiple times throughout the week. Another thing that was interesting, one night we had this object come over that was shaped like a CSETI triangle, and that CSETI triangle was based on a crop circle that we had mentally shown the ETs to make in 1992 that then materialized that night in a field in England. And if you go to CSETI.org, you'll see what it looks like. And subsequently, Charlie Balog, who's on our team and your team there in Arizona, had on his first CSETI expedition this amazing experience where he saw this triangular-shaped object with three globes, and then there was this sort of tones and music coming from it. And he's a musician, so he was able to compose that music, if you remember.
Yeah.
And this is actually, if you go to CSETI.org, you'll see this is absolutely stunning, beautiful, cosmic. Well, that next day, after we saw this triangular ship floating over the Sangre de Cristo mountains, I was hiking with a member of our team, Jack, up to the Tibetan stupa from the house we were renting. And we did this every day. It was about a 4-mile hike and about 2 miles uphill. And we're going along, and suddenly, in my mind's eye, I see that form, and then I start hearing, just at the edge of this dimension, the chords of this beautiful music that he had seen and felt when he saw that shape during his first contact experience that Charlie had seen. And then remember, one day we were looking at the photographs in the library of this house, and Trudy, you heard that music.
The local music. It was so distinctive. It was not my imagination. I didn't believe it.
No, this was absolutely what I heard, and it didn't go on for just a second or two. It went on for a period of time. And
you heard it.
And it was crystal clear, and it was like bleeding from almost a celestial level of extraterrestrial dimension into linear space-time. And the fact that you and I both, but these were totally different days, had identical experiences with these tones is pretty amazing.
Yes, it is.
And those are actually some of the tones and things that we play out in the field under the stars and send out with radio signals out into space, because they're just absolutely beautiful.
I think another thing that happened, I thought was really interesting, happened. We were leaving the circle. Everybody had gone home, and you and Jan and Jack were walking up the path to the cars, and you heard beeping sounds coming from the circle.
That's right.
And there was nothing there. Nobody was there. Nothing was there. And actually, I was in front of you, closer to the cars, but I actually heard those beeping sounds too. So. Right.
Yeah, they were very, very distinct. In fact, we thought they were, it almost sounded like one of the radar detectors that had been left in the field, but there were none left behind. And it was incredibly distinct, and it happened twice. And then when we got back to the house, our detector just beeped 3 times, and then again as we entered the house. And we knew that there were a group of ETs that were dematerialized, but electronically really locked onto us, exactly precision, that traveled with us from the site up to our house, which was only about a 4-minute drive, luckily. One of the nice things about that site on the land that we have was that it was so convenient, and it was actually a beautiful setting.
Yes. Oh, I'm looking at my notes in here. Debbie saw, she was sitting across from Steven, and at one point, I forget which night it was, but Debbie saw underneath Steve's chair, behind his legs, she saw a green light, and that was reflected in the Tibetan prayer bowl. And she said it and everything, and it was caught on camera, and it is a remarkable picture, I think.
Right. Yeah, it's actually, you can tell there's this light almost transdimensionally emerging out of the side of I have a Tibetan prayer bowl that I ring to start the meditations. And you could actually see this energy and light emerging, it seemed like out of the side of the bowl.
It's beautiful.
It's a beautiful photograph. Yeah, it's a very distinct.
It really is.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful photograph. So, a lot of people ask, how many things like this happen in the course of a week like this? Well, it's literally dozens or hundreds. And it's really exciting. And there is this exponential increase in contact and sightings, because just 3 months ago when we were at Marco Island, Florida, we had this whole trans-dimensional interstellar gathering that's the videotape of it, well, you've seen it now, Trudy, is stupefying, because there are all these objects that are there 100 yards or 200 yards away, and this goes on for 3.5 hours.
It was a remarkable night, that's for sure. And what I was fascinated by were all the activity on the ground, all the energy forms and lights and things that were going on, and beings that actually materialized.
Right.
And so much was happening that night, I couldn't even keep up with it.
Well, that's because, we're sure that this is all the secrecy and the deception that's been put up around the subject is going to collapse. And these interstellar civilizations want us to be aware that they're here. We have to make the big changes on this planet, but when we do, then they're going to welcome us with open arms to this interplanetary community. And we're in the very early stages. And so what CSETI is doing is sort of pioneering that effort. And we're out of time now, but I just want to say I hope people can join us on one of these expeditions that are coming up, either in England or Mount Shasta or in Southern California in the desert this fall. And it's a really beautiful experience, and I think most people are pretty amazed when they come to these, the deepening of the experience in higher states of consciousness and their abilities that unfold in just a few days. And it's because it's not just what we're sharing, it's also, I think, that there are beings both in the spirit world and also extraterrestrial civilizations that actively engage the whole group and help transform the energy of the group. And that's what's so amazing about it. And it's this a very multidimensional experience. So, well, Trudy, I'd like to thank you for sharing your experiences and thoughts today. We're out of time.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me on.
And I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us every 2 weeks. And until next time, this is Dr. Steven Greer with Conversations with Dr. Greer. And keep looking up because we are not alone. God bless you all and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.